You scratch any hempster, they'll tell you that there was this great conspiracy that they made hemp illegal in the 1930s because it was a threat to Hearst, Mellon, and DuPont, and these huge industrialists, because hemp was such a threat to their financial interests. Unfortunately, I've found no statistics or no data to support that.
That's hemp historian John Dvorak. This is the Lancaster Farming Industrial Hemp Podcast. My name is Eric Herlock, and today we're going to dig into the history of hemp. John has been researching hemp history for over 30 years and has created an incredible archive of material at Hempologyorg. Today we'll hear about hemp's role in early America, how it became illegal in the 20th century, and the pioneers of the 1990s who laid the groundwork for what has become the modern hemp industry. First, we'll take a quick sponsor break and then come back with a couple of nuggets of hemp news, and then we'll hear my conversation with John Dvorak from Hempologyorg. This episode is brought to you in part by Impactful Ventures, an investment and incubation company focused on supporting startups and other initiatives that play a vital role in reversing the adverse effects of climate change. They strive to amplify enterprises which bring innovative green opportunities to the forefront and empower those making a significant impact for a sustainable future. You can learn more at impactfulventures.org. This episode is brought to you in part by IND Hemp in Fort Benton, Montana, where their mission is to provide innovative agricultural products and services to connect American farmers with the pioneers and businesses that see hemp as a way to bring real and lasting change to our communities and planet. IND Hemp. Okay, welcome back. Here we are. It's the week of Thanksgiving 2022. Happy Thanksgiving to all of you. I've got a lot to be thankful for, and I'm sure you do too. And maybe you can tell from my voice that I'm still battling this cold that I caught last week somewhere. So it's weird because, in the whole time of the pandemic, I didn't catch a cold, right? I had COVID once there at the end, but didn't get sick for years, and I forgot how miserable having a cold is. So anyway, I'm almost at the end of it. But luckily, the interview I recorded with John Dvorak was before I got sick, so you don't have to deal with this froggy voice for much longer. All right, so a couple of nuggets of hemp news for you this week. This first one comes out of Oregon. I saw this on KOIN.com. The headline reads, "Evacuation orders lifted after hemp plant fire in Grass Valley." So the evacuation orders were lifted for Grass Valley, Oregon residents on Monday after a hemp plant erupted in flames and burned 5 employees, according to the Sherman County Sheriff's Office. Deputies said residents were urged to leave their homes Sunday afternoon because there was a risk that combustible chemicals in the area could explode. Authorities told KOIN6 that the blaze was only smoldering as of Monday morning. The Oregon State Fire Marshal, DEQ, and hazmat teams responded to the plant early Monday morning. Officials determined the scene was clear and lifted the evacuation orders shortly before noon. The sheriff's office first posted about the blaze on Facebook shortly before 3:45 p.m. Sunday. Nearly 3 hours later, deputies said the building was fully engulfed and there had been multiple small explosions. All right, and this next story, I'm sure you've seen it go by in your news feed by now. I've seen it from a few different sources, but this one is on Smithsonian.com. The headline says, "Cows that ate hemp produced milk with THC and CBD." And the story says that dairy cows that chowed down on industrial hemp produced milk that contained the psychoactive compound THC, as well as CBD and other cannabinoids, according to new research published Monday in the journal Nature Food. The animals' behavior changed too. They yawned, salivated, appeared unsteady on their feet, and even had red eyes, the researchers observed. I'm surprised they didn't make and they were listening to Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon all day. I'm just annoyed by this story because it really just sort of muddies the whole conversation about hemp as a livestock feed, right? No one's talking about chopping up floral material to feed to your cows. The conversation is about hemp grain as a feed, and that's what we need to focus on. So I'm not annoyed at the researchers who did this, because it is good to know how like the transference works, right? But the way the news media is handling this is just so counterproductive. So I'm not even going to read the rest of the story, because you've probably seen it already, but I'm just sort of here to express my annoyance. All right, moving on. All right, so one more here. This one's from Hemp Today, and it says that food sector is chance for Colorado hemp to rebound, U.S. group says. So the story says that as Colorado hemp stakeholders kick the CBD habit, they have the opportunity to establish the state as a hotbed for hemp food production, according to a recent analysis and call to arms from the Hemp Food Association. With a small but enduring group of legacy hemp food companies, proven products, and established production and supply chains, Colorado is well positioned in a health-oriented consumer market that is turning more and more to natural products. Colorado companies have played a key role in the development of hemp seed as food, a sector that has now reached $1 billion in sales globally, according to the HFA. The state's hemp food makers, some of whom have been operating since the 1990s, have developed such products as corn chips and baking mixes containing hemp seed, plant-based meat, butter, coffee, hemp seed bars, ice cream, and protein powders. No state has had more hemp food companies in it, not even California, HFA said. In addition to having a cannabis-friendly culture, state government officials in Colorado have long supported the cannabis industries for their potential to advance the interests of small family farmers. The state has supported research and says it is committed to implementing large-scale initiatives to develop food, fuel, and other hemp outputs. Governor Jared Polis has called Colorado's hemp program a model for the country. All right, so that's the news. So now let's get on with our interview. John Dvorak, hemp historian at Hempologyorg. Welcome to the Lancaster Farming Industrial Hemp Podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Eric. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So why don't we start with you just giving us a brief introduction of yourself and sort of the work you do.
Okay. Well, I've been interested in hemp since the early 90s. I got involved with marijuana reform and got involved with NORML. But I realized that there was a lot of hemp out there, hemp history, especially up here in New England. So I started documenting that and put together Hempologyorg, which is my hemp history website. And I helped edit Hemp magazine back in the 1990s. I've written for several publications, including Hemp World, Hemp Times, some old magazines that were, again, going on back in the 90s. I've been researching hemp and uncovering a lot of different articles and images from the internet. And I've got a lot of old books too, a lot of history books. And so I put those together on hempology.org for people to check out and to learn them so that they can learn more about hemp. And I also put together the Cannabis Curriculum, which I cover. That includes hemp and medical marijuana and the drug war. So I am a whole plant activist. I love hemp, but I'm also a cannabis consumer. I have been for 40 years. But I believe the drug war is a horrible, horrible thing. It's really destroyed the inner cities and it's disproportionately affected the people of color. So we have to end the drug war. We have to make medical marijuana available to everybody, and we have to make it as easy as possible for our farmers to grow hemp, which is an environmentally friendly and profitable crop. So,
all right. Well, thank you for the work that thank you for the work that you're doing. Let's talk about that cannabis curriculum. How do you use that? Like, where is that employed? Is that something that you sort of use as a teaching mechanism, or like how do people interact with your curriculum?
Well, I have my slides out there on hempology.org that you can check out, and I've got a few videos with my audio talking through the slides. I have about 35 different slides covering all sorts of topics related to cannabis, hemp, marijuana and the drug war. And being up in Boston, there's a lot of colleges and universities up here. So I've been giving my talk to universities if they have a normal chapter or a SSDP, which is Students for a Sensible Drug Policy. I'll come in and talk to the college students at BU, Northeastern, UConn, down in Rhode Island, up in New Hampshire. I've been all around all sorts of different colleges talking to the students, letting them know that no matter what class they're taking, they can apply it to cannabis, hemp, marijuana, or the drug war. There's so many different aspects of cannabis. If it's a sociology class, economics, if it's a chemistry class, biology, it doesn't matter. There's some area that you can apply to cannabis and hemp. And so that's what the cannabis curriculum is, really. It's trying to turn reefer madness into reefer gladness, because the government has spent the last 80 years demonizing the cannabis plant. And my goal is to make people appreciate it and to understand it better and to fully utilize it.
Good. Are you surprised or excited about how things have developed it seems like the hemp has sort of roared back, in the past 5 years or so. Are you surprised by this, or would you like to see it unfolding differently, or just, what are your thoughts on how hemp has made a resurgence?
I'm very happy where we are. We're still at the very beginning. And since they basically legalized hemp with a 2018 Farm Bill, which was a great thing, unfortunately, they put this restriction on the definition of hemp. In order for a plant or for cannabis to be called hemp, it has to have no more than 0.3% THC, which is just insane, in my opinion. It's all cannabis is hemp. The stalk, seed, and root of any cannabis plant can be turned into healthy and environmentally friendly hemp products. So this whole definition is hamstringing the hemp industry. I call it a catch 422, because it's our government's way of putting illogical and super restrictive, regulations on hemp. And they do the same thing with medical marijuana too, with so many rules and regulations, when we know that's a very safe and effective medicine. Hemp needs to be freed. We need to get rid of that 0.3% limit on THC, and we need to deschedule the entire cannabis plant, remove it from the schedule of narcotics, so that the hemp industry can reach its full potential. I believe it will be $1 trillion crop. However, with these restrictions, it makes it very difficult. And as you know, down in Pennsylvania, not a lot of farmers are growing for fiber right now. Right. It's just, because there's a number of reasons, the restrictions, but also the infrastructure. We're building the infrastructure of an entire industry from the ground up. So we've got a lot of work to do, but I'm glad we're doing this podcast, because this is an opportunity for your listeners to get in on the ground floor of what I believe is going to be $1 trillion industry. And so it's going to be hard. It's going to be a lot of work, but the potential is there.
Right, good. Getting back to the curriculum, can you talk about maybe some of the students' reaction to it, or where they've taken the information they learned from you? Like any interesting projects have come out of that?
Yeah, I do get a lot of really good feedback from the students. I know that they enjoy the lecture and seeing my traveling hemp museum, which is a lot of different artifacts and products made out of hemp, so that they can actually see things made out of hemp.
Right.
So I've gotten a great reaction from them, and I've followed some of them. I've known them for years, and they've all become, very responsible and productive members of society. So it's been great to help them on their way.
Good. Let's dig in a little bit on your sort of archival material at hempology.org. Can you sort of describe what you have there?
I've got a lot of different articles and books. I've been able to download over 200 different PDFs so it's the source, it's digitized versions of old books, articles, United States Department of Agriculture yearbooks, and and prints like old drawings of cannabis. There's going back hundreds of years, they've been documenting this plant. They've been showing people what it's used for. They used it for fiber. They used it for rope and cordage, of course, but they also used it for medicine. So it's like we've been, the whole reefer madness thing saying there was no useful for this plant. However, we've been documenting that there for hundreds of years, for thousands of years, this plant has been used by mankind, and so it needs to be used again. And I think by documenting the history, we can show people, hey, they used to treat it just like a regular plant, and that's the way we should in the future.
Right. Amen to that. Is there anything that you've learned in your research that sort of challenges the accepted narrative around hemp? And I guess what I mean by that is there's the story of, in the 30s where, hemp was a threat to the DuPonts or to the Hearst, newspaper fortune or whatever. And, they lobbied the government and demonized it, et cetera. But have you seen anything to contradict that narrative?
Right. Well, that's one of the if you scratch any hempster, they'll tell you that there was this, or marijuana activists, they'll let you know about this great conspiracy that they made hemp illegal in the 1930s because it was a threat to Hearst, Mellon, and DuPont, and these huge industrialists, because hemp was such a threat to their financial interests. Unfortunately, I've found no statistics or no data to support that. And I believe that hemp died out on its own in America based on a confluence of economic factors that occurred during the 1800s. And so there were a number of different things. And actually, cannabis or hemp was never really grown. It was grown in America during colonial times. They knew how important it was for the ropes, the rigging, and the sails of all the sailing ships back then. But we did grow hemp. They grew a lot of hemp down in Pennsylvania in the 1700s. But into the 1800s, there were a lot of other different fibers that were used for rope and cordage, like sisal from Mexico, jute from India and China, and Manila hemp from the Philippines. Imports of these fibers flooded into America during the 1800s. And these fibers were a lot cheaper than hemp, so cannabis hemp producers couldn't compete with that. In addition, in Russia, they grew a lot of hemp in Russia, millions of acres, and they had done it for hundreds of years. So American farmers could not compete with Russian hemp. So they didn't grow it very much, especially into the 1800s. They did create a hemp industry in Kentucky. They tried to anyway in the early 1800s, but that peaked at 1850 when they grew about 200,000 acres of hemp. And that may sound like a lot, but compared to the millions of acres of corn, wheat, cotton, and other competing crops, hemp was just a drop in the bucket. So that was in 1850, the hemp industry peaked in Kentucky. And by 1900, they were only growing a few thousand acres of hemp in the entire country. And by the time the 30s rolled around and reefer madness was in full swing, they were only growing a few hundred acres of hemp. So hemp was not a threat to anybody in the 1930s. It was an afterthought. So that was one of the biggest surprises that I found with doing my research, is that it wasn't a conspiracy. It was just they basically made hemp illegal as part of the Marijuana Tax Act just because it's cannabis, not because it was a threat to anybody. So they were demonizing the entire plant, including hemp. And unfortunately, they're still demonizing it.
Right. So it wasn't an economic threat, but they tried to pitch it as a threat to society because it was some evil drug.
That's right. And they made you could still grow hemp in the 40s and the 50s, but they made so many regulations on it that the farmers just said, forget this. Right. And the fact that there's Russian hemp out there that they can import for a good price, or these other hemps like sisal, Manila hemp, and jute. So there's a lot of other fibers out there. and hemp was just a minor one at the time.
So it sort of died a natural death.
Yeah, pretty much. Although you would, when World War II rolled around, I don't know if you want to talk about that a little bit.
Well, the Hemp for Victory program, right? We needed to grow hemp because the supply chains for the Manila hemp that the U.S. Navy depended on, they were cut off because the Japanese had taken those islands. So we needed to grow our own hemp again.
Exactly. That and the jute, we would import a lot of jute from India and China. Those imports got cut off during the war too. So yeah, our government was like, oh, wow, we need fiber, we need rope, we need string, we need parachute webbing. Hey, let's grow hemp again. Why not? So they came up with the Hemp for Victory campaign, and they grew it all throughout the Midwest.
Yep.
And they built factories all around out there in Minnesota, Illinois, Wisconsin, Indiana, and Iowa to process all of this hemp fiber. And they hired women, some of the first women hempsters, to work in these mills. And that helped kickstart the women's movement in America, actually. Unfortunately, fortunately, the program was very successful, but unfortunately, as soon as the war was over, they shut the program down, sold all the factories, and basically made hemp illegal again. So it was a good program. But one of the good things about the Hemp for Victory campaign is that they have a lot of wild hemp that's still growing in these states where they had the fields. So people are going out, finding these hemp fields from World War II and using those genetics, finding wild feral hemp and starting to grow it again, which is really good. So, and that's one thing I want to mention. In Pennsylvania, for colonial hemp, I want to find some feral hemp, some wild hemp that's been growing for almost 400 years, either up here in New England or in Pennsylvania.
And do you think that exists? Do you think it's out there?
I think so. You know, if it could be along an old riverbed or a fence line somewhere, if we can find, and if you go to a historical society, they can let you know where who the farmers were and what they were growing. And then you might be able to find a stand of hemp or cannabis that's been reseeding itself for almost 400 years. And if we could find those genetics, I think that would be fantastic to introduce that into the modern hemp industry. So I want your listeners to go out there on a treasure hunt and start looking for feral hemp.
Are you familiar with the work of Les Stark?
I am.
You
Les
are,
is
okay.
A great guy. Yeah, wonderful guy.
He's our Pennsylvania hemp historian. He's written a book called Hempstone Heritage, and he's gone out and he's documented many of the old mills that were processing hemp in the 17 and 1800s. Really fascinating stuff.
I was going to mention Les if you didn't, so thank you.
So what does Richard Nixon have to do with the story of hemp? What did he do? Did he? I feel like he tried to put the final nail in the coffin by the Controlled Substances Act, where he.
Well, yeah, that's true. I mean, he basically escalated or restarted the war on drugs by disregarding the Schaefer Commission in the early 70s and then ramping up penalties on marijuana. But I'm not sure about hemp. I mean, because they just weren't, it wasn't being grown in America back then. So. But during the 80s, the DEA, thanks to Ronald Reagan and the Just Say No campaign, they started paying states to eradicate cannabis. And they did it because of marijuana. They were trying to get rid of marijuana grows, and they were flying around in helicopters all around the country. And in 1987, they eradicated over 100 million cannabis plants, and they have a book, and that's on hempology.org. You can see the source document, but they have a state-by-state breakdown of the cannabis eradication. In 93 or 94% of the plants were ditchweed, which is basically hemp. So, and they were going around paying states to find stands of hemp in Indiana, Kentucky, Kansas, all these hemp growing states. And by 1993, they were destroying 400 million plants a year. Wow. So they were spending a lot of money to find and destroy hemp plants. which
That's a
is just,
shame. Yeah.
it's a shame, and it's just a total waste of money.
Because those
But
plants were acclimated to those regions, right? And that could have
they
been
were,
so valuable for geneticists now to
yeah,
use that stuff in. Yeah, that's crazy.
exactly. And they kept going back year after year because they couldn't get rid of it. So again, we can use this data and those source documents that I have on hempology.org to go and see where they were eradicating that cannabis. Now we already, they know where it is, because I'm sure they were marking where they were pulling these plants up.
Right.
So why not go back there and
There
use
you
it
go.
for, use hemp for good purposes.
Um, Something started to change in the 1990s, right? Like that's when sort of the modern hemp era began. Can you talk about that time and maybe some of the folks who were involved
Sure.
in hemp back then?
Right. And again, consider the backdrop of the whole Just Say No campaign. So marijuana was still being totally demonized in America. This is 1990 is when Jack Herer wrote The Emperor Wears No Clothes. And this was the Bible for a whole generation of hempsters, including myself. We cut our teeth on this book. It had so much information about the uses of hemp and the history of hemp. It was awesome. Chris Conrad wrote another great book, Hemp Lifeline to the Future. It was very useful. Don Warchafter started the Ohio Hempery, he had a mail order catalog with dozens of really good products. Of course, hemp was not grown in America at the time, so he had to import all of his hemp from China or Europe. The Bronners, David and Michael Bronner, started adding hemp seed oil to their soaps. Mm-hmm. And you can get Dr. Bronner's all over, which we use it all the time. So make sure you listeners out there, go get some Dr. Bronner's and support the hemp industry. Steve D'Angelo and Eric Steenstra started Ecolution, a really good hemp company in the 90s. And both Stevie D and Eric are still active in the cannabis world today.
Yeah, I do know Eric. I've met Eric, talked to him.
Oh, yeah, he's a great guy. And there were some great events. Like in 1996, I was lucky enough, I went to Amsterdam for the Cannabis Cup, and they had a hemp expo there. It was like maybe 12, 15 hemp companies set up their booths there at the Cannabis Cup. And so these were some of the original people in the hemp industry. I wrote an article for that for Hemp Magazine, and you can find that out there on the internet. 1998, Paul Galen put on the Santa Cruz Hemp Expo, which was dozens of vendors and thousands of attendees. And Paul actually created a documentary movie, Hemp Hooray, that you can find on YouTube. So you should check out. You can see what was going on in the 90s back then. One of the things was we had a lot of discussions back then because we knew we were going to be lobbying Congress and talking to conservative farmers about growing hemp. So we didn't want to come across as a bunch of pot smoking hippies, which a few of us were actually. But so we were a lot of discussions about separating the rope from the dope as we were lobbying to make hemp legalized. Unfortunately, when they did legalize hemp through the Farm Bill, they put such super tight restrictions, that 0.3% limit on THC, that they threw that whole rope from dope concept out the window because, well, we know that you can make rope from dope, or at least from the marijuana stems and stalks. So it's like you really can't separate it. But
yeah, well, thinking about that restriction, the 0.3%, and it's just like it created this opportunity for a loophole. And I'm talking about like the THC, what are they, isomers, the Delta 8, Delta 10. And it's like the early people spent so much time saying, hemp is not going to get you high. But then because of like shoddy regulation, hemp can get you high now. So it kind of like undercut the original message, which is unfortunate. We just need, sensible cannabis regulation. Right.
We do have that whole issue with the Delta 8, you're right. And actually there's companies out there collecting the stalks from marijuana grows and from CBD grows, because right now the stalks are a waste product. They're collecting those stalks and turning them into hemp products. Mm-hmm. So Doesn't matter what the government says, the entire plant is hemp, or
Yeah.
the entire stalk is.
Right. I'm a big fan of the fiber and grain side of the industry. I mean, don't get me wrong. I love the cannabinoids, wonderful stuff, great medicine, et cetera, et cetera. But I'm just, so fascinated and excited about the potential of the fiber and grain to sort of retool our economy, to revitalize our communities, change our food habits and our waste habits. There's so much potential that it's exciting for me as a journalist to sort of watch this industry like put itself together, right? Yeah, so it's
amazing.
It's a neat story. It's a slow burn, but it's fascinating. I think it's one of the most important stories in agriculture. In I don't know, but we'll see where this goes. So I feel extremely lucky that I get to talk to people in this space about what they're doing, and folks like you who have been collecting all of this fascinating material. In your work, are there do you have favorite stories about hemp in the old days, or
Sure.
something that other things that surprised you, or you think that our listeners might find fascinating?
Absolutely. Yeah, one of the coolest things that I found out recently was in India over 1,500 years ago. It's called the Ellora Caves. It's a complex of caves where they built all these temples 1,500 years ago. And they realized recently that the artifacts in some of these caves were very well preserved. And when they looked into it, they realized that they had used a hemp plaster on the walls of these caves. And that had helped regulate the humidity, and it kept bugs out.
Right.
So they realized, and they documented that this hemp plaster had helped preserve these artifacts for 1,500 years, which I think is really cool, because now we're finding out that hempcrete is a wonder material that does so many good things. In prehistoric times in Japan, hemp was very important. They found a cave drawing depicting hemp being brought over to Japan in a boat. And it was very important to their Shinto religion. And at some of the shrines in Japan, they put these huge cannabis rope or hemp ropes across the entrance of the shrine. It's an act of ritual purification. They're called shimenawa. And they also tie shimenawa around trees, sacred trees, for protection. So hemp was very important in Japan and China for thousands of years. Hemp made its way went into around the world, basically, and almost every culture has its own word or name for cannabis, for hemp. During the age of sail, hemp was so important to the sailing ships, and for the ropes being used, and for the canvas sails. The word canvas is derived from the word cannabis for this very reason, because they used cannabis to make the canvas sails for the ships and for the Conestoga wagons and the prairie schooners that explored and settled our western frontier. During the Civil War, there was a battle in Lexington, Missouri. It was occurring around the Masonic College, right on the Missouri River. Soldiers found some hemp bales that were about to be shipped downstream. They used these hemp bales as a movable breastwork and pushed them up the hill to win the battle. That became known as the Battle of the Hemp Bales, and they still have reenactments out in Lexington, Missouri every so often. So that's a really cool little tidbit. Up in Vermont, good old Thaddeus Fairbanks was running the St. Johnsbury Hemp Company, and he realized that they needed a way to weigh all of the hemp that was being grown in Vermont and upstate New York. So he invented a platform scale where you could just pull a wagon right up on the scale and weigh it. And this was very successful, and the Fairbanks Scale Company is still in business today.
Wow.
During 1866, the first transatlantic cable was stretched between Canada and Europe. This ushered in a whole new era of telecommunications. This cable had a copper core, but it was wrapped with latex, hemp fiber, and steel. And they used hemp fiber because it's strong and flexible. So that was, very important part for the new era of telecommunications. So there are a lot of tidbits out there, a lot of great hemp history. I haven't found all of it, but if you go to hempology.org, hopefully I've inspired you to learn more about hemp history and find more and let other people know what you find.
Right. Is there a mechanism on the site that people can reach you and share their data and research with you?
Sure. Well, just my email, boston.hemp@pobox.com, and that's on the website. It's readily available. And I'm on Facebook and YouTube. Hempology.org is a YouTube channel.
Okay.
So I'm out there.
Yeah. So you've spent a lot of time looking backwards at the hemp industry. How about looking forward? What do you see? What are some of the things that you're excited by or surprised by, or what are your thoughts on the future of hemp?
The future, as I mentioned earlier, the future is bright indeed. It's going to be wonderful thing, and that's why I call hemp the green buffalo. The indigenous people of this continent use the entire buffalo to survive. And in the same way, you can use the entire cannabis plant to make so many essential products: food, fuel, building materials, biodegradable plastic, tree-free paper, clothing, and of course, medicine. So that's why I call hemp the green buffalo. But we have to use the entire plant. We have to understand that there's so many beneficial uses of it. And that's why I need everybody, all of your listeners, to use more hemp, wear hemp, eat hemp, write on hemp, build with hemp. Because the more hemp we use, the more demand there will be for our farmers to grow more hemp. Because we're starting this whole industry from the ground up. We are the tip of the spear here. We have to create this demand. So it's imperative for your listeners to help with this. If they're adding on to a house or renovating a house, use some hemp. Use hempcrete. Or there's also hemp wood now out there. You can build furniture, put in flooring, paneling out of hemp. It's awesome. Hemp insulation, hemp countertops. There's so many different things you can use for building materials with hemp. So do that, or eat hemp. Get some shelled hemp seed. Drink hemp milk. Get some hemp power bars, hemp protein powder. And this is available. It's out in supermarkets. It's not just tucked away in health food stores anymore. Although, of course, you can get it at health food stores. That's great. But you could also get it at major supermarkets. CVS sells hemp seed. And, of course, online, at any of the online retailers. So use hemp.
So you're up in Boston, although you do have a very strange Boston accent.
Yep.
What role did New England play in the early American hemp industry? Are there any good stories from up there?
Hemp was very important during the age of sail for over 300 years, from like 1500 into the 1800s. This was when hemp was at its peak influence around the world. And because sailing ships were so important for exploration, commerce, and warfare, the great armadas of the day bestowed vast power and wealth on the countries that had them. And hemp was very important because they used thousands of pounds of hemp rope, rigging, cordage, line, anchor cables. The huge canvas sails were made out of cannabis hemp. So hemp was very important. Russia grew a lot of hemp. France grew a lot of hemp. We tried to grow hemp in America in the colonies. Some of our first presidents grew hemp. And again, though, Russia grew the most hemp, very high quality at a very low price. So we imported a lot of hemp into New England, and we would spin that hemp fiber into ropes or weave it into canvas sails. Now, they would turn this fiber into ropes in these long wooden buildings called rope walks. And by 1800, there were over 150 rope walks all up and down the eastern seaboard. And Henry Wadsworth Longfellow actually wrote a poem titled Rope Walk. And it's a really great, good poem. He talks about the cultivation and the harvesting of hemp, as well as the various uses of hemp. So There are a lot of rope walks up there. And in Plymouth, just south of Boston, the Plymouth Cordage Company was one of the largest cordage makers in the world for over 100 years. They had a rope walk in Plymouth, actually, that they took apart and moved down to Mystic, Connecticut, to the Mystic Seaport Museum. So you can actually go visit an old rope walk and see how they spun hemp fiber into rope.
Is it operational, like they do demonstrations?
I believe they do, yeah.
Oh, wow.
It's
Cool.
got all the old machinery, all the old equipment in there,
Right.
and it's really cool. Now, in Boston, the Charlestown Navy Yard, this is where the USS Constitution is stationed. And this
It's
is
old Ironsides, right?
Old Ironsides is
Yep.
the oldest commissioned warship in the world. And they, there's a museum, USS Constitution Museum, that have some exhibits talking about all the rope they used and how it was made and what it was used for. And they actually built a 1/4-mile rope walk at the Navy Yard. And most of the old rope walks were made out of wood, but this one is made out of granite with a slate roof, and it's 1/4 mile long. And they recently renovated it, turned it into condos. So you can actually live in a rope walk in Boston, which would be really cool. So that's, some of the New England, there's a lot of New England hemp history up here, but that's just a few of the tidbits there.
All right. Well, John, thanks for sharing all this with me today. It's great to talk to you.
Sure. Thank you, Eric. And thanks for all your great work. I really appreciate it. You're letting people know about hemp and educating them. And this is very important.
Good. Yeah, we're all in it together, right?
Yes, sir.
All right. Well, John Dvorak, hemp historian at hempologyorg. Check him out online. And yeah, all right. Well, thank you so much for your time. It's great to talk to you. And we'll keep in touch.
Thank you. You take care.
All right, there you go. I implore you to check out John's archive and Cannabis Curriculum at hempologyorg. It's a treasure trove of hemp history. And you can find a link to that page on the show page for this episode at lancasterfarming.com, where I've also got links to some of the other things that John mentioned, including the Hemp Hooray video, the Ellora Caves in India, the Battle of the Hemp Bales in Missouri, that rope walk poem by Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. In that building long and low, with its windows all a row, like the portholes of a hulk, human spiders spin and spin, backward down their threads so thin, dropping each a hempen bulk. So check it out. I've got links to those news nuggets too. So let me know what you think about any of this stuff. Drop me a line. You can always email me at podcast@lancasterfarming.com. My name is Eric Herlock. I'm the digital editor at Lancaster Farming Newspaper, the greatest agricultural newspaper in the world. All right, so that does it for me. I'm going to go have some elderberry syrup and bone broth and hope for the best. All right, until next time, I will see you in the newspaper.
Industrial hemp.
Season 2, Episode 44 of the Lancaster Farming Industrial Hemp Podcast. Copyright 2022 by Lancaster Farming Newspaper, part of the Time and Communications family. Today's show is written, recorded, edited, and produced by Eric Herlock. The music you hear throughout the show is courtesy of Tin Bird Shadow.